Hi. This is Steve Gillmor. This is the Gillmor Gang. Robert Scoble is somewhere in the desert and will probably not join us today, but we'll leave the middle channel open for him should he appear. People who are appearing include from an undisclosed location, Dan Farber. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
Also from, I believe, San Jose in his backyard, Kevin Marks.
Hi there, yes. I'm in San Jose and I'm surrounded by oranges. We had our orange tree pruned. So I've got about 400 oranges in boxes over here.
Nice. Well, you're going to distribute them to everybody in the chat room after the show, right?
Yes.
It's Oprah. And last but not least is Keith Teare. Welcome, Keith.
I also have an orange tree, but they taste like lemons. They're terrible.
Oh, you're always trying to say that you're the same thing.
I'm just being humble. My orange tree sucks.
Is that a humble brag?
I think so.
Okay, excellent. I never understood what that meant because I am ever so humble. All right, so we won't hear much about CES, at least not from somebody who was actually there, but from what I understand from reports, nothing happened at CES. Dan Farber, what do you think happened at CES?
Well, I go to...
What? Dan, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. And I'm going to talk to you about CES, right?
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, I didn't go this year, but I certainly saw a lot of the news coming out of there, and it's kind of what we typically expect, that things are faster, better, cheaper, smarter, and so on. And I think the big theme of the show this year was wearables. Everything from watches to clothing to new kinds of eyeglasses, and certainly new, the next generation of cell phones with, curved glass and more sensors, home automation. So kind of like just a continuation of 2013 into 2014.
There was one headline that I saw that said that Netflix was the big winner at CES. Does anybody know what that means?
Well, number one, they announced that they're going to be the first to do 4K UHD streaming pretty soon as well, I think. So if you're going to buy a 4K TV, which the price for which is now down below $2,000 and even lower if you buy a Chinese one, 4K streaming previously wasn't doable, but there's a new codec that lets you do 4K at 15 megabits per second, which is doable. And Netflix seems to be converting its whole library to be first to the game. So it could be referring to that.
The number of 15K stream, or it's 15 megabit streams, I believe, in the marketplace is not high, though.
Well, it includes pretty much every Comcast customer and probably most Time Warner customers. So it's significant if you're a cable company.
Right, but since those are shared streams, at least for Comcast, if everybody's on 15K, then the promised download speed is probably going to be halved or worse.
We'll see. I'm not convinced of that. I think the head ends at the street level and the backhaul to the real head end can deal with quite a lot of sharing these days. It's fiber for the most part.
Kevin Marks, what do you think 4K is a big deal, and if so, why?
I'm not sure it's much of a big deal in itself, because the difference in what you can see is small compared to the difference between going from standard def to high def. But what it means is that we'll actually have more very high-res screens around cheaply, which would be good for the rest of computing and things, for having high-res monitors around. We're already getting there with, the screens we're getting on laptops and the bigger tablets now are already very close to the 4K definition. They're not quite there. And what we've had is that the screens on the desktop have been left behind a bit, because the sort of the sweet spot there has been the 1080p screens that you can now buy very cheaply. So having the manufacturing ramp up on that will be good for us in general in terms of having better quality stuff. The value of that many pixels is not really in video. It's in reading lots of text and making sense of information. So my sense of it is that will mean that we end up with some more very high definition screens, and the compromises we've been making to render stuff in pixels for the last few years will just go away completely.
The other thing to note, Kevin, is Dell announced a 28-inch 4K screen. They already have a 24-inch that costs $1,200 and a 30-something inch that costs nearly $4,000. They announced something in the middle, 28 inches, but it's only going to be $699, and it's targeting Mac Pro buyers.
Right. Well, that would suit me obviously as well, because what's happened is that the external screens are now lower res than the screens on the laptops and the tablets, which is kind of weird, and the pricing for those has been enormous. They've been more than twice the price of the computers. So that them hit that Moore's law curve is a good thing, and what it'll mean is that we can for me, I think it'll accelerate the resolution independent design and moving away from thinking in terms of pixels, and that but we've already started to see that on mobile as the screens have gone to very high density on there, and the desktops are now lagging behind mobile, and they need to catch up.
Yeah, I think that's right.
What do you mean by moving away from pixels? I don't understand that.
Well, the thing is, this
pixel density.
This phone has a pixel density that means it has as many pixels as my TV screen. It's a 1080p phone, which means that I can't see individual pixels with my eye at all. I need a magnifying glass, and that means that when you're designing for it, you're no longer thinking about pixels. You can think about text and graphs and things like that without ever thinking about where the pixels fall. And that's actually very free design.
The simple way of saying it is that for any given letter that you have to render on the screen, or anything you have to render on the screen, you can use more pixels to render the same image, thus making the image much sharper. But what you're effectively doing by doing that is taking the gross number of pixels and reducing it down. So, for example, you can say 4 pixels now equals what used to be 1. So you've literally quadrupled the number of pixels, but then you've divided by 4 to get back to the same looking screen, except it's a lot more sharp. So its pixel density becomes more important than absolute number of pixels.
So that's the simple way of looking at it.
That is the simple. I'm a simple man.
I thought I was understanding it there a while ago, but you've got me back.
What it means is that this stuff
just
becomes legible.
Now. Sorry?
What it means is that the screen should become enormously legible. We've already seen this effect over the past few years with the cell phones. A few years ago, the number of pixels on here was what were they, like 320 by 480, and now this is 1080 by 1920. So it's the resolution has gone up so fast and so high that it just looks like a brightly lit piece of paper in effect.
Well, for me, my eyes are going south so rapidly that I can now see much more clearly that I can't see anything.
Yes. No, I've had that problem too. Yeah. No, I've now got progressive lenses, so I have to tilt my head up and down to focus, and that. But what I was before I got these, what I was doing was taking my glasses off and holding this thing like 3 inches from my eye because I still had a near point there. And that that's going to go away as I get older, and that will move further away. So I'm going to need a bigger thing to hold further away. So I'm hoping that the 4K stuff comes in time for that, so I can have a 4K thing, at arm's length rather than a thing 3 inches from my eye.
Dan Farber, do you think that this move toward greater resolution is as significant as a thing that is going on right now, or is there something else that's an Uber theme that's going on?
Well, the move to more pixels, that's kind of inevitable. It's Moore's law, and we're going to see more pixels, even though It's very hard to tell the difference unless you get really close to the picture. But as soon as House of Cards comes out in 4K, people will, be talking about it, and it's really just to kind of to market and, give the manufacturers another reason for people to buy another TV or to upgrade their TVs, even though what's visible to the human eye won't be that much. But I think the larger theme is I guess you could call it going back to the Internet of Things, which is just kind of cheap sensors and devices that will mean that there's just so much data, so many new kinds of apps, everything from your home to your body to your health to your car, and so on, and that's really, to me, the big theme for the next year.
What about the thought that the hardware revolution is beginning to slow, as to your point, the devices are becoming smaller and cheaper. So this high end of the market, although it does drive a certain amount of progress in terms of things like the Mac Pro and high-end video, etc., that it really doesn't do much for most people, as opposed to this small cell revolution and basically the software side of things, that we're now starting to see a build out of the real-time messaging environment as being the thing that's really an Uber theme. Or at least that's what I think. What do you think?
Well, the vast majority of people on the planet aren't going to have any kind of 4K TVs anytime soon. So, it makes sense that there's kind of two parallel universes going on. There's the universe of really fantastic innovation that's available mostly to the few, and then there's the way the innovation trickles down into devices that can be used by the masses in emerging markets. So it's just a continuum, and there are forcing functions that, as the market says, well, 4K TVs and 4K content are the next big thing. It'll take a while, but inevitably it'll be driven down to kind of cheaper and smaller consumer devices and become more of a standard.
But I think, Steve, you're right to say that these things are all just means to an end, and the end is not the hardware. The hardware is simply a way of distributing a signal, either a transmitted signal or a received signal. And all that's really happening is as the hardware becomes cheaper and more ubiquitous and more diversified in terms of its granularity, software just has more ways to get to you. And it's really all about human knowledge and the ability to both digest and contribute knowledge. And the ways in which the individual can do that now, I would probably argue that hasn't moved very fast. And if you think about Twitter 2 or 3 years ago, or Facebook 2 or 3 years ago, most of the innovation there is in targeting for the purposes of monetizing. Very little of it is organizing for purposes of understanding.
I'm not sure what you mean by. I
mean the ability to digest the streams and understand what's in them and extract from them what you care about. I don't think it's improved that much in 2, 3, maybe even 4 years.
Right, I would agree with you, but I think that there's a lot of, strategy going into that on the part of a lot of the vendors, not just in the consumer space, but obviously also the enterprise space. What do you think, Kevin, is the outgrowth of this? Do you see any open standards emerging in terms of messaging, or are we pretty much in a sort of a holding pattern?
There's a lot of back and forth going on there. I think what we're seeing is a lot of independent efforts to overlay on top of SMS. So we've got Twitter and Google and Facebook and Apple all trying to overlay their own protocols on top of SMS and get you to switch to using theirs instead. And that's, along with a lot of the small companies that Keith's been talking about, the WhatsApps and people like that, who are doing something similar. And we have a challenge there because the standards we did have for messaging, XMPP, has sort of been that was the thing that Facebook and Google and everyone was using for quite a while, and that has the use of that has gone down. So we do have a problem of interoperability of messaging. What you end up having to do is send stuff over more than one channel, and that's I think that's going to be around for a while, and it'll take a while to get those to converge again.
What kind of protocol does WhatsApp use?
I haven't analyzed it. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. I think, is it XMPP based, Keith? Have you looked at these?
I don't think it is, but if it is, they've hidden it. There's no way to go and configure another XMPP client to talk to a WhatsApp client. So if it is XMPP, it's all on the back end, and it is not exposed in any way.
Jerome is talking about the headphone boom, or you are, Kevin. What are you talking about?
Well, Jerome in the chat room said that people put up with crappy MP3 audio, so why would they care about higher quality video? And my pushback on that was that actually what's happened over the last few years has been this enormous boom in higher quality headphones, and that has then driven people. You can then hear the difference between highly compressed MP3s and lightly compressed MP3s, and so the bit rate of MP3s that people are distributing has gone up from 128K to 320K in many cases, and partly that has been because people have actually switched to using headphones that actually reproduce properly, rather than little bitty ones like this are out of fashion, whereas gigantic over-the-ear things that look like 1970s studio cans are now what you see people wearing everywhere, and that is a big change, And if you go to an electronics shop now, you'll find that there are like 6 hours of headphones and only 2 hours of computers. So that has been that transition has happened, and that has meant that people have got more fussy about audio quality over time, and so. And that's partly, and it's also a function of as storage goes up faster, you don't have to compress things as hard to store the same number of things, and you can actually afford to stream things as the networks get faster. You can stream audio over them more reliably, so you don't have to carry copies of everything around anymore. So there's been a big boom in quality in audio, and it saturates a bit. There's a limit to not everyone's going to buy the ridiculous high-end audio speakers, but the baseline of audio quality has gone up enormously over the last few years.
Sorry,
have you tried them? I haven't actually tried any of the Dr. Dre's or anything. I still use the Apple ones, which I find to be pretty decent. I did notice that somebody at CES claims to have innovated in-ear earphones to be able to more accurately reproduce. And I didn't follow up on that story, so I don't know if they actually delivered on it. But does anyone actually use the Dr. Dre's? Are they significantly better than anything that we already use?
I've used. I mean, they're certainly better than these kinds of things because they've just got bigger drivers, so they've got better bass response, and they've also got more isolation. But what's happened is that there's been an understanding of the difference between shitty headphones and good headphones. I tend to use crappy headphones because I'm normally listening to either speech stuff while I'm cycling, and I actually need some leakage from the outside world. But what I see people walking around, and certainly my kids and around the house, they are buying things that look like studio headphones, and I've now got. I've been buying the nice Sennheiser 240s, which are now priced at about the same price as they're priced cheaper than some of these fashion headphones, but the actual audio quality of those fashion headphones can be pretty good. I did go to an event last year by one of these companies where they showed like 16 different models, and at some point they stopped being features and started being decorative. So they had ones that were sparkly and looked like they were made of crystals, and they had ones that had designer logos and things like that, but the basic drivers were the same. And what I haven't seen is good headset mics, things like that. That hasn't been driven to the same extent, but that definitely the audio quality of those things has gone up to the point where it's certainly beyond my ability to tell them apart. But even people who've got better ears than me for listening to quality can have the baseline is now pretty good.
It's my sense that the boombox, the sort of hip hop audio stuff is very heavily weighted toward high-end bass, and it's kind of an acquired taste for people who are used to actually good high-quality earphones. I know that when I went and bought some, I was looking for noise canceling for the plane, and I ended up with, I believe it's Koss or Boss, one or the other, just because even though the others were maybe $100 less, that this thing that I've got, of course, was just phenomenal in terms of its quality. Unfortunately, my daughter took it, and so we were on the way to and from New York, and then in the hotel room, she just wore out the battery. So I spent most of my time at the airport on the way back finding batteries for her.
And what did she do to your data plan?
That's a whole other discussion.
Well,
the answer is no problem,
this?
just as long as I have unlimited funds.
Let me do it this way.
Yeah, stop.
Can you see that? Look at that.
No. Stop.
$700, $750.
That is
that
my
all?
AT&T bill from last month because I was in China for 2 weeks. Yeah, and I bought the $120 800 meg package that's like the biggest data package you can buy to protect you from overcharging. So about $300 of that is in China. The other 442 is just my regular family plan. So the first thing I did this morning is go down to T-Mobile and transfer to T-Mobile for $150 a month, free, no data overages, and free international roaming.
I did that last year, definitely. That meant my last trip to England and France, I didn't have to swap my SIM out, which was really nice. So that's I think T-Mobile. That was one of the actual stories from CES was John Legere from T-Mobile getting aggressive about this and saying, okay, we decided to stop having a stupid plan that annoys the crap out of you and give you one that's coherent and makes sense, and we'll even pay you the stupid fees you have to pay to get out of your contract on the other carriers. Right. Very impressed by that. They're actually competing by saying, okay, we're sick of this confusopoly of crappy pricing. We'll have something good. And I've been using T-Mobile for about a year, and I've been impressed with it.
So this is a new unlocked iPhone 5S 64 gig. I gave them back my old one, and they gave me $300 for it. But the total savings I'll make over 2 years from that change is $6,000.
Wow.
I'm not sure why.
Because I just look at my AT&T bill and how much I spend versus on their bill, you can't spend more than they tell you. There's no way to go over. So you can only spend...
I know, but the quality is, in terms of...
As good. No, it's as good. It's LTE.
Yeah. But it's the number of LTE nodes that they have is small compared to...
Okay, so if you live in a farm in the middle of the Midwest, don't do it. But if you live in any major city in the U.S., that's not an issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I was, when my Wi-Fi went down last week, I was doing the broadcast over LTE on the Nexus 5, and that was
it looked great.
Surprised by the quality. So I've been impressed by what I've been able to do with it.
So, and I like the fact that the guy is saying things like, "We're going to take the bastards down," and we're the uncarrier, and there's no contracts, and you can change anytime you want. I mean, it's all probably BS, and there's probably a punchline coming somewhere, sometime. Maybe it isn't, but whatever the truth is, the short-term impact's huge, and he's telling the story really impressively and very aggressively, like going to the AT&T party with Macklemore in Las Vegas and getting thrown out by the heavies and stuff. I think if I was the shareholders of T-Mobile, I'd be giving that guy a raise.
So I want to switch topics since Dan Farber seems to be silent on the subject of earphones. Not one of your fascinating topics.
I'm not silent. I have my old Apple earphones, but I can't hear very well no matter what earphones, so it really doesn't make any difference. But I think to the point about earphones and headphones, it's it's a fashion buy right now. I think what Dr. Dre has learned, they've taken a page out of Apple, which is they're selling lifestyle. They're not just selling a technology.
Yeah, well, it's definitely lifestyle because it's not quality. And if you don't believe me, read the chat room because they do. So I want to switch to, there seems to be a certain amount of maturing in the media business. And at an interesting point, Jason Calicanis has a newsletter, an email newsletter called Launch. I think it's branded around everything else that he's doing with this conference, etc. And it just went pay today. In other words, he's basically charging...
Yeah, $100 a year. Or, if you pay more, you get some special services or access or something like that. But he's also starting a new site called inside.com. So between Jason Calicanis and Walt Mossberg and Swisher and the new Greenwald and Company site and a few other things popping up, the media business is flourishing with the people trying to make a business out of it.
Yeah, that's what I want to handicap it a little bit. Do you really think? I'm sure that he's figured this out in terms of how many people actually have to sign up in order for him to be able to survive with this. But that's a really tough business. I mean, there's another terrific email newsletter from Jason Hirschhorn, who used to be the CEO of MySpace, I believe, among other things. And he floated a question. He has a little thing at the top of his newsletter where he posts his musings of the day. And a couple of weeks ago, he floated the idea of how much would you be willing to pay for this service? Something on the order of maybe 10% or less of what Jason's talking about. And he was asking, I don't know that he was saying, okay, this is it, and we're going to cut them off. I just wonder whether or not moving directly from a pay-only site for these guys is going to work.
Well, it's an interesting move. The thing about Jason, I read Jason, and he's incredibly entertaining. I mean, when you start reading one of his things, you don't put it down till you've finished.
Yeah, I'm not talking so much about his expounding.
The email, not the newsletter.
Yeah, this is a newsletter which is basically curated by a bunch of editors that he's hired. And it started with him basically doing it, and now it's he interspersed his own comments, but that seems to have disappeared in favor of. And as Dan suggests, he's also working on this other project that probably is taking much more of his time.
So I was starting by being positive, but I was going to make the point that I don't think it'll work. And the reason I don't think it'll work is there's a big trend towards newsletters. There's the guy whose name begins with B who does the mobile newsletter. You mentioned him last week, Steve.
Benedict Evans.
Benedict Evans. Fantastic newsletter. I've actually stopped blogging, and I wrote the first essay of a newsletter myself that sent to 4,000 people and got fantastic reaction from people who would never have given a reaction in public.
So you wouldn't send it to me, huh? That's interesting.
I probably did send it to you.
Well, enjoy your last appearance.
In your case, you probably got it 5 times.
No, I haven't gotten it once.
It's called Death in the Valley. Are you sure you've never seen that?
Positive.
Okay, well,
Tina says she's seen it, but
I can spam you afterwards with it. But
I get it.
Anyway, there's this trend towards high-quality newsletters. Now, in the past, and they're all free, and they're great. In the past, Esther Dyson did build a decent business with Release 1.0 and her Conference PC Forum. And I think Jason's probably modeling himself on that. But he doesn't have the same kind of content that Esther used to have. Esther was really deep, monthly and deep and substantial. It was usually a 50-page thing with a bunch of different writers. People like all the original stuff about tags that Weinberger did, for example, were in release 1.0. And I don't think Jason's quite in that bracket, and so I don't think it'll work. And I think the better model is to write great stuff in order to put yourself on the map, and then make your money with, feeding off the consequences of that, rather than trying to charge for the content.
Well, I was going to ask Dan what he thought about that.
Well, let me try to unpack this a little bit. There's a site, The Information, which is Jessica Lesson's site, and they're charging $340 a year, and trying to break some stories and give some insight. Hired a few reporters, but fundamentally, it's not that much different from Recode, which used to be All Things D, TechCrunch, or other sites. I mean, fundamentally, these sites are built on the idea that most of the money is going to be made on conferences. That over time, hopefully, that the website and the mobile apps, in other words, the content production, the cost of that content production gets paid for. Take someone like Benedict Evans. He puts out a newsletter every Sunday. He just tweeted out that he had almost 10,000 subscribers, or people who get it. Now, it's just a bunch of links to things that he's written and other people have written, so there's not a huge amount of depth in that itself. But just imagine if he charged $1 a month. I mean, what's $1 to anybody these days? If you take what Jason is doing or others, I mean, everybody's hopefully at a point where maybe people want to pay for the content they consume, but for the most part, it's a very hard thing to do. I think, Andrew Sullivan's had challenges. The site that I think Paul Carr did, they merged with Pando Daily. So it's not easy to get people to part with their money, even a cup of coffee a month, which I've always found disheartening.
Even $1 a month. Dan, my guess is if he charged $1 a month, that 10,000 would go down to less than 1,000.
Yeah,
because people don't find value in it necessarily then, because it's more there's a certain amount of mechanism like, oh well, how do I get that dollar? Well, we know that's been solved pretty much easily now. It's just that people don't value the content they consume. They'll pay $35 a month for the New York Times, but they're not going to pay $1 a month for somebody's newsletter.
And it's because of supply and demand. I mean, Benedict's stuff's really good, but in general, I value mostly the stuff he's written himself. All the links and stuff, I've usually seen them before, or if I haven't, they're repetitive of things I have seen before. So I think his own writing is excellent, and his thought process is excellent, and that is something that he could monetize for sure. But I don't know if he has to monetize it by charging the reader directly. I think he can do it through books, through events.
Well, he needs to set up his own conference, like Horace Didieu is doing.
Yeah, I would if I was him. That's what I'd do, because he has a lot of the things that you need to be able to be successful at doing that.
Well, I think part of the issue here is assuming that everyone's paying the same price. And one of the revolutions that's happened in funding over the last few years has been giving people the options to pay different prices. And if we look at things like Bandcamp and Kickstarter, they've made it, and Humble Bundle, for example, they've made it fairly clear that there's a set of people who will pay and a set of people who won't pay, and then there are a set of people who will happily pay more. So to say, oh, we need to get $1 from every user, is possibly less useful than having lots of users and some of whom pay you more. In a sense, it's what opera and public radio and things have been doing for years. But there's finding ways to encourage people to pay more who can afford more, to fund it for other people.
Well, one of the gang is the classic is Danny. I mean, Danny spent the last decade or more successfully monetizing his understanding of the search ecosystem, and he's first in class. And I don't know how much Danny makes, but having work for myself and try to optimize revenue, it's usually pretty hard to make. You can make about $500,000 a year working for yourself if you're really successful. And to go beyond that, you need an event that pulls in other people.
Well, his events are pretty successful.
Yeah.
I mean,
Very successful, yeah.
Any event that can, attract Steve Gillmor, a year ago.
Exactly, that's my point. So, so whatever you do yourself, writing or video, it doesn't matter what it is, unless you externalize beyond yourself and pull in an audience that will pay admission, your upside is capped.
Well, here's how I think the dynamics of it from an economic perspective really work. Basically, if you expend a lot of time, if you make a large time commitment to something, I mean, like I spent a lot of time on the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, just because there's, over the course of time, there's just a tremendous amount of information that either I need to see it because it's valuable, or I need to see it because I'm trying to figure out what it is that's sticking to the wall in those two, national newspapers, regardless of whether I agree with it. Which in terms of the political coverage of the Journal, I disagree with most of it. But talking about Benedict Evans for a second, the Cubed podcast that he does with Ben Beharan is of such a high quality in terms of just the minds that are at work there, that there's just really no other way of getting that kind of insight except spending the time. And it's not time that you can spend while you are, also browsing the internet and doing that. Maybe other people can multitask. I'm not one of them. I just basically have to concentrate. I have to commit that hour and 15, whatever it is, minutes in order to be able to get the most out of that. And I think that if you amortize that incentive over the time that you spend versus the amount that it costs you, whether or not it's in your own time or by subsidizing or supporting it, then you come up with an equation that I think is going to be more and more common.
Yeah, but don't you think that Benedict, what you just described with Benedict, what you do, to me, that is an extension of social media, in that the technology we've all built and used has provided the method for you to be in a conversation, one way or two way, with him regularly every week. And if you met him in the street, you wouldn't pay him to talk, for him to talk to you, and you shouldn't pay him.
You can't afford him. I mean, he is an analyst, and he gets paid large amounts of money by major telcos and things like that. I'm sure I don't know his business model particularly.
Right, but so he's marketing a little bit like Tim Ferriss does. They're marketing themselves through things they produce, and the consequence of that marketing being successful is that they get to either big salaries or to run events, or they get hired in important positions in big companies, or they become consultants, blah, blah, blah. That seems to work. That's now, obviously to do that, you have to be incredibly conscious of what you do and why you do it, and you have to understand how to follow through and convert it. Dave Weiner always has talked about this. His blog isn't to make money, and he used to go crazy when people said, "How do you make money from blogging?" And he said, "You're nuts. That isn't the point. Blogging is where you become known, and you make money because you're known and respected."
Yeah, but I'm trying to tease out the other side of this, which Dan mentioned, which is, getting $1 is doable, and if you get volume with $1, you're approaching the model of some of these other venues, such as the one that we're on, TechCrunch and others, where it doesn't seem like you're paying $1, but you are in terms of attention that you're paying, which is being returned on the part of the vendors who are being talked about, the technologies that are emerging. We spend a lot of time in this so-called tech market just trying to figure out what's the most efficient way of being able to take advantage of emerging technologies so that we don't get run over in our businesses or in our ability to be able to make a living by change. And I think that is worth something. My question about what Jason is doing is that I think that he's putting the cart before the horse a little bit by just cutting it off, as opposed to doing what some companies have done with freemium and the like. Is that you, Kevin? Yeah. That's so. Dan, does that resonate for you at all, what I just said, or are you firmly in the camp of it's just hard to do and that you have to go toward big events in order to be able to market this stuff?
Well, as we've been saying, there's lots of variations. Whether it's the public radio model or conferences or whatever. I think it's not necessarily supply and demand. It's a value proposition, which is to say, what are you willing to pay for? What can you not live without for a fee or even a modest fee? So, for example, the Monday Note. I don't know if people get the Monday Note from Frédéric Filloux and Jean-Louis Gasset. I mean, that's some of the best analysis that I've seen. And it comes out every week usually, and it's free. They're just doing it, but I would willingly pay for something like that. But I'm not everybody.
Right, but you don't need to be everybody in order to, if you can get up above
No,
the
I think
noise.
you just select, For example, there's a site called Sinocism. That's a guy in China who covers everything going on in China. He used to have a daily newsletter, and it was free. And then, he said, well, I can't keep doing this. Can somebody help, pay? And kind of went to the NPR model and didn't get enough subscribers. And therefore, he had to go down to weekly, and apparently not enough people wanted it or complained enough. So to that degree, it is a supply and demand value proposition. And hard to say. I think people just keep throwing stuff against the wall, and see what works.
Mm-hmm.
So, Google AdSense, in a way, is the only effective solution that was ever created for this. And it kind of coincided with the rise of blogs and the atomization of content, deportalization that happened between 2005, 2008. And Google AdSense basically said, okay, you can all make money if you've got readers, and we'll take some of it. And it created a platform approach to monetizing content through advertising. Subscribers, there are some people who can make money from subscribers. I wouldn't dispute that for a minute, but they're pretty small in number. And even for the successful ones, the number of subscribers may not equal a business. It may equal a sole proprietorship where you can actually make a living for the really good ones. But for the most part, it doesn't. So you end up in this world of aggregated advertising against atomized content. And in the mobile world, nobody's figured that out yet. There is no equivalent of Google AdSense for mobile. Something that goes across and is easy to implement and is non-obtrusive to the reader. And maybe aggregated subscriptions would work. If Jason and Benedict and 5 others were all available in a Flipboard-like subscription, that could work, maybe. Because then you might pay $10 a month if there were 10 of them writing, and there was enough content to last a 5-hour flight from San Francisco to New York.
I think that the key is, just grabbing the it's a shelf space issue. Grabbing, in a virtual world, apparently there's unlimited shelf space, but the reality is that the time that the user takes to consume it is the gating factor. And you have to attract attention, as Benedict is now doing. Then you have to sustain it. And I've somehow got some subscriptions, online subscriptions to Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Rolling Stone. There's a British music paper called I forget.
Melody Maker.
No, it's something
New Musical Express.
Upside, or I forget. If I went to my newsstand, I would find it, because somehow I subscribed to one issue about a year ago, but they keep basically resubscribing me each month, and normally I would cut it off. At some point, this in-app purchasing starts to get really annoying, and you go in and prune some of those things because they don't provide continued value. But interestingly, this magazine has continued to provide enough value, so it's just above the irritation level where I say that's just not worth it. And so there is this kind of aggregated thing that starts to happen, but it's largely ad hoc, at least in my experience. The opposite side of this is the Netflix model, which is they basically do the same thing by using loss leaders like House of Cards and etc. to attract people, but they keep sustaining their audience because, for a couple of reasons. Number one, my children see that is the only real television. They're not completely uninterested in the network broadcasts, mostly because they're willing to wait the 6 months for the last season to show up on Netflix. So they are consuming that, but they're consuming it on a delayed basis. And I think delay versus speed is really the equation here. And
that reminds me. It reminds me, Steve. HBO. I saw that Game of Thrones. They're going to let you binge watch the whole season, starting with the first episode's launch date, if you do it online.
Really?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think that's pretty amazing. Although, so evidently the economics of not having the water cooler conversation each week are giving way to what?
I don't know, because I never have the water cooler conversation because I typically work in my own office and there's no one to talk to.
Well, I watched Game of Thrones by binge watching it because I resisted it for years, and then once I was hooked, I binge watched until my eyes fell out. And now I'm stranded waiting for this next one.
That is the problem. Too many 2 a.m. going to beds if you binge watch.
2 a.m. All right. So anything else that we want to sort of rake over the coals here? I'm sorry to see that Eric Eldon is left TechCrunch. I think he's been a phenomenal editor and really stabilized the publication. I'm sure that the people that are replacing him will continue that stability, but he's, if anything, I'm glad that it took him resigning in order for him to write a good post. He hasn't been writing in years. So
I thought it was a very Gillmor-esque post, actually.
Well, I appreciate the compliment, but since I don't do that anymore,
it wasn't a compliment.
Okay, that's two, and you don't get a third strike on this show.
No, I'm kidding. It has to be said, and because I co-founded TechCrunch, I often I'm asked to talk about it, but I have very little to do with it. My co-foundership is vastly exaggerated, as everyone here knows. But I will say this: I think that the team as a whole there have improved TechCrunch. TechCrunch is now probably as good, if not better, than it's ever been. And that's saying something for a company that was acquired by AOL 3 years ago. And Dan, you probably look at it from the point of view of through the spectrum of competitive publication, and I know with some warmth in your heart because of the former relationships and everything. But from the outside, it's incredibly impressive that it hasn't collapsed in on itself, and through hiring a young and hungry and a team that cares, it really does still have a personality, even though it isn't Mike's. Although some of Mike's personality is still in it, of course. I think Alexia is Mike's, love child.
Ooh, I'm not going there.
Not literally.
Dan, any thoughts?
Alexia's keeping Mike's spirit in there. I think that's very true. Yeah.
Yes, I would agree. I think they've done a terrific job.
What do you see as the landscape right now for tech news? Do you see any exciting content that's appearing that cuts through the usual stuff that's going on?
Well, I think there's a lot of great competition, and people more in-depth pieces, and hopefully people getting out and doing the research and doing the interviews and digging deeper. And sites like Medium and several others that we are seeing much better content coming out, not just the speeds and feeds product, press release rewrites.
There's a question from Clive Bolton about being able to see the show on Android phones. The player spins on his Nexus 4. I have no idea. We'll see if we can find out. Are you talking about the live show, or are you talking about the playback on Saturdays on TechCrunch?
He's probably talking about the live show. I've got a Nexus phone here. I can check.
Oh, he's saying the recording, the TC recording.
Oh.
I don't know, but we will find out. Any other things that you want to talk about, Kevin? I'm
trying to think what else has been going on this week. I haven't seen anything come out of CES that was actually very interesting. Has anyone else, apart from the T-Mobile stuff? I thought that was fascinating. Has anyone else picked up anything from there, or is it a quiet year over there?
Well, I think it's telling that Dan didn't go this time.
I'm trying to think what else has been going on this week.
This is you, Steve, from about 5 minutes ago. So it does play on Android.
Stream.
But that's the stream, the TechCrunch recording.
I need to step out for a few minutes. I'll be right back.
Okay, great. So the answer to
the question was
CES is, honestly, Apple pretty much destroyed CES effectively by counter-programming all their big announcements. I mean, it was only how many years ago was it? 7 years ago that the iPhone was premiered simultaneously. Right. It was either the iPhone or the iPad that was launched counter to CES.
Macworld.
Yeah.
Right.
And then they've done other announcements that were just not even Macworld. That's just their own announcements at this time, but they haven't done one this year.
Well, there was a lot of press leakage during the last week. For example, Apple's Q4, over the Christmas period, they took just under 30% of the computer market. I don't know if it's the laptop or desktop or combined, which was massively up from anything they'd ever done before. And Dell and all the others were hugely declined. That came out last week. And then most of the news about revenue coming from the App Store over the last 30 days was showing that the gap between the Google Play Store and the App Store is widening, not narrowing, in Apple's favor. So there was quite a few kind of press stories that were Apple-centric that you assume Apple somewhere behind the scenes was in the mix for.
Well, I mean, we get dinged a lot for being so Apple-centric, but I make no apology for it. I think that, I frankly think that there's this rapid move away from the web. Kevin, cue Kevin.
No, I'm sure. I don't think that's actually true. I think that's, but the other thing is that as Android has an install base that's high enough now, having a website is something that's useful, because that gets you across the platforms, even if you have to build an app as well. I mean, that was the other sort of damp squib this week was the launch of Jelly, which is almost the apotheosis of we should make an app to do this, when actually what it's doing you can do with Instagram or Twitter itself. And I don't see any value that's been added by that thing being an app in its own right.
And apotheosis means what?
Well, I suppose not apotheosis in this case,
good.
is it?
Okay.
Apotheosis means turning into a god. It's more of a apocolosyntosis, isn't it, where they turn into a pumpkin. They
explain a complicated word with an even more complicated word.
So the point is that there's been this. We must make apps. We must make apps. The web is dead. And
I didn't say the web was dead. I said that there's people are focusing on apps.
No, but people have been focusing on apps. But this is an example of we've built an app, and Keith talked about this a couple of episodes ago about how much effort and work and how many people you have to hire and to build an app, and it takes a long time. And they've been through that process and come out with this thing at the end, and effectively you can do the same thing just by using Instagram. There's no real added benefit from what they've built, as far as I can see. Someone else got rid of the oranges. No, that was. I posted when we had the orange trees trimmed. I posted a photograph of our oranges, and I deliberately posted it on Jelly and on Instagram and on Facebook and Twitter, and Google Plus to see where I got responses. And I got helpful responses on Facebook and Twitter, and not very helpful responses on Jelly. And
what is Jelly?
Jelly is Biz Stone's new startup. The way I think of it is I separate two things out. The first thing, and I think this part of it's a mistake, is they've made it so that you must take a picture of something in order to ask a question of your social network. The second bit, I think, is actually more interesting, which is that you don't do searches anymore. You ask your social network to help you with a problem.
Right.
Now that doesn't work. If you want to get a flight from San Francisco to Paris, that's not going to be very helpful. But if you want to know,
well, I could tell you not to use Air France.
Probably, yeah. You have to sit with French people. That's the main thing.
So direct recommendations are much more valuable and time efficient than looking for something.
Well, it's a question of what kind of question you're asking as well.
I think so. But that means there is a space for Jelly, I think, Kevin.
Well, I think there potentially is, but I'm not sure there's a space for Jelly, because in keeping an app around just for that, where the value is, I'm asking this of a social network where I have some sense of who would respond. There are questions that you'd ask on Facebook that you wouldn't ask on Twitter, and vice versa. There are questions you'd ask on Google Plus that you wouldn't ask on either of those two, mostly programming questions. You have a sense of the set of people who are there and what they're likely to talk about within these different things, and saying, I agree with you about the photograph thing. Also, you can't reply with a photograph, which is even weirder. If you're going to ask questions with photographs, a response with a photograph makes sense, which is something you can do on the other
I think you're
platforms.
just giving them all kinds of nice product features to add. I think what makes Jelly work at this point is the fact that it only does one thing. And you take a picture and you ask somebody a question and then people answer. But you can see how this technology can be used to add new kinds of features, such as what Kevin was suggesting.
But the point is that it's not, the idea of I can ask a question with a picture maybe it was an exciting new idea when they started building this thing, but now that's something you can trivially do with the Twitter app, the Google Plus app, the Facebook app, and Instagram, and probably any other.
Yeah, but I think the reason that Instagram, but I think it's more like Instagram in the sense that from a case point of view, which is Instagram only did one silly thing. You took a picture and you put a filter on it. This does one silly thing. You take a picture and you ask a question and people answer. It's the fact that it's, it's like a little app that just does one thing and it's kind of cute and a little bit serendipitous, and maybe it'll take off, maybe it won't. But it's, it's not trying to boil the ocean at all.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I also think the reality of push notifications being the unification of all these apps is at play here, because if you don't get in anybody's face unless you have something interesting to say or interesting to ask, then in the notification universe, it doesn't matter. You're not wasting anybody's time, especially your own. And I think that that plays into what Dan's talking about in terms of the simplicity and the sort of one feature strategy. In effect, it gives you the time to be able to build your audience.
But it's to me, it speaks to another opportunity, which is kind of interesting. I was listening to Mark Andreessen last week, and he, I don't know if he was being facetious or whether he meant it, but he talked about missing Usenet. And for those of us who are old enough, we four all will remember what Usenet was, but it was highly structured, asynchronous conversations.
Discussion
groups. And the structure came through the topic, which was expressed in the title of the group. And it was very granular because you could delimit a group right down to a very specific level. So, you wouldn't talk about animals, but you might talk about, white dogs from Germany or whatever, and it would be alt.dogs.germany.white, for example. And what happened there is experts or people who were interested gravitated around the groups that they most cared about and talked to each other. And if you think of the mobile ecosystem, we don't really have an organizing principle like that around ideas or content. Twitter is too disorganized to be that. If it had track, as Steve used to want, it could get close to it.
It has track. You just have to pay for it.
You have to pay for it, but you also have to. It's not effortless in the way that Usenet was kind of effortless.
Ad mentions is close enough. It really is.
No, I don't know.
You can signal somebody with an ad mention.
Aren't Reddit groups the new Usenet? They've got the same basic affordance. You've got r/whatever, and then you have the discussion in it, and the same structure of posts and replies to the posts.
I mean,
that seems to feel very web centric.
The problem for those,
most people don't use Reddit on mobile.
The problem for discussion groups, I thought was solved by blogs, and that was that. The thing that emerges out of those discussion groups is you get these kind of domain police, that people who sort of rise to become moderators, or effectively they become little czars of these topics, and they start getting very, very proprietary and covetous of their domain. And I thought that when the blogs came along, it basically was people like Dave Weiner saying, just say what you think and get some traction and just do it yourself. And it's true that it doesn't have the same kind of structure or the same kind of depth that the old discussion groups have. But I think it pretty much demolished the discussion group model. So I'm not so sure that what you're looking for here in terms of the mobile environment.
No, I think it's something like, let's say you wanted to go to a photography place where you knew that Philip Bloom and 10 other really well-known photographers would be checking every day. I don't think Twitter really plays that role. I think it's too asynchronous to the point where you actually miss most of the stuff and don't even notice it. So you're not really as intimately connected to the people who you should be connected to if you care about something. And anyway, I'm just saying I think that's still an opportunity. I don't think that's a closed area by any means.
All right, so I'm going to wind this one up. Let's go around the table and summarize, extemporize. Anything else you want to talk about? Let's start with Dan Farber.
Oh, I don't have much else to say other than if you shop to Target, you need to, check in about your credit cards.
You mean your advice? Change all your passwords, freak out?
Something like that, or at least check into it and make sure you understand what's going on there. Because I think they announced today that about a third of the people in America may have been impacted by this event.
Wow. But again, how do you figure out what your possible vulnerability is?
Well, I think if Target has your information, then you may want to think about changing passwords and things, and getting a card or whatever.
wasn't it more about the danger seemed to be that if you were using any card at all at Target, that you were vulnerable.
Yeah, even through the checkout.
Yeah, it went through their point of sale systems, not online.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, Kevin.
Now I'm thinking about Target. So I think I've had this week where a lot of people have gone to CES and not posted very much at all, and that's kind of surprising, because I usually expect to see some kind of pattern emerge from that, and I haven't really seen any pattern of new devices emerging there at all. So it does seem like a consolidation time.
They were all drunk most of the time, probably.
Yeah, but that's always been true.
That's always been true. They've always found ways to flock and talk about something, and I didn't see anything at all. And maybe I wasn't paying enough attention, but I didn't see much at all.
Keith?
My debit card did get dinged. I tried to buy something with it and couldn't, and called Citibank, and they had 2 very large attempted transactions on it. And I don't shop at Target, but my wife does, and we ended up having to get issued new cards, and they even took down our Citibank ID and made us get new ones. So I think they're not doing what normally happens in this case, which is everyone who's affected gets told and asked to change their card, because 70 million is too many. The logistics would be a nightmare. So I think they're being proactive to actual occurrences of attempted fraud. Which is what happened in my case.
Yeah, we seem to. I saw a number of examples when we were in New York this past week of our bank sort of proactively shutting us down, or sending a change notification, or just basic. But when we called, everything was fine. Either that or everything is gone, and we just don't know it yet. So. Bliss is ignorance, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I think that what we're seeing here in terms of the drought of information about CES is a combination of the things we've talked about, and also the constant flow and stream of news information about technology is so pervasive and so constant that getting into one of these big omnibus conferences that's not from a vendor, but rather from whoever it is that's actually doing CES these days, is just a sign of the same dynamics that these become mostly PR events where based on what used to be just after Christmas, the beginning of the next year's shopping patterns. And I think that the Netflix and some of these streaming solutions have so upended the traditional windows for marketing of products that we're seeing a lot of vendors like Apple, who usually either counter-program or are involved in these kinds of big shows, opting for just going direct onto their own timetable and whenever they can control the messages. So I don't see. I didn't have any interest in going this year, and we'll hopefully we'll hear next week from Scoble about maybe he found out something that was interesting. Okay, I want to thank Rackspace, and particularly Rob Legess, without which the show would not have come back to the air. I want to thank NewTek and the TriCaster. We apologize for still being on the old system, but our next show, Tina promises me that either it will be our next show or it will be our next show. It's just a question of whether it'll be next week or not. We're going to get this damn thing working. And again, that is not an indictment of this damn thing. That's an indictment of our ability to be in two places at once and not anywhere at all. And I want to thank Dan Farber for consenting to sit with us from your taking time out from your meditation.
Thank you. It was good to see everybody.
Likewise. I want to thank Kevin Marks.
Thank you.
And, of course, Keith Teare.
Thank you.
Thanks to the chat room, our producer and director, Tina Chase Gillmor, as always. She's amazing. And I'm paid to say that, by the way.
And happy birthday.
Yes. It was happy birthday. Shall we sing? No. Thanks to the folks in the chat room. You guys need to be a little bit more verbal. Just kidding. Thanks to everybody who showed up, and especially those who didn't. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.